Okay, good evening. Do you have any changes to the agenda?
No changes.
See here. Packet real quick. Consent agenda, we have meeting minutes to approve from February 2nd, 2025, and from March 3rd, 2026. Comment? Changes? To approve?
I move.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Item we have is a public hearing for approval of preliminary plat for Northview Preserve Second Edition.
Thank you, Chair and Commission. This first item on the dais before you tonight is Northview Preserve Second Edition, which is a 10-lot residential subdivision. This is a preliminary plat application by Summergate Development. Previous actions in this area. So Summergate initially started exploring the Knapp property in 2024. And then later was approved for preliminary plat for a larger development just south of the project area. This area is the Thompson property, just to the west of the entrance to the Northview Preserve development. It's about 4.5 acres. It's currently a homestead. The comp plan guides this as low density, which is 2 to 5 units per acre, and it's zoned accordingly as R2. The proposal is 10 single-family lots. Just an aerial of the site. And then again, this is the original Northview Preserve area, which was 75 lots for single-family, just under 2.5 net acres, units per acre. This box here, this is where we're looking. So during some of the concept plans, the developer was taking a look at other adjacent sites to make sure that the stub streets and utilities could extend beyond should development happen adjacent to the property in the future. The Thompson property was one of the properties. They did some conceptual ghost lines for the property. No other changes no other access points are proposed for this part of the development to Territorial. They're utilizing the same Holden Way entrance at Territorial Road. So this is a by right development proposal, meaning they're proposing the minimum standards for the R2 district. So they're not requesting variances or any special approvals. They're just going for the R2 district standard lots at 10,000 square foot minimum with 10-foot side setbacks. So it's a 10 lot development and fairly straightforward. So the site is utilizing Holden Way, and there's one stormwater pond in the northeast corner, and then it's graded out between the original Northview Preserve area and this area. So the stormwater management facilities are working sort of in tandem in this area. And then the landscaping proposed here in front of the screen is highly focused on Territorial Road with lot trees in the front yards. This is a pretty simple, straightforward subdivision application. This is a public hearing for the pre-plat. All of the standards for the R2 and the subdivision they're all meeting our required minimums. So staff does recommend approval of this Northview Preserve Second Edition preliminary plat, and there's a motion in front of you on the screen. And then just one other note in the staff report, you noticed there was mention of a slight change in the original area. The developer is seeking to shift the road stub on the west end of the development area, the Bluebird Way, slightly to the south. So the entire right of way, as it moves to the south, is all on the Gamak property. This property here, rather than straddling the shared property line. The lot is coming in for staff as a construction plan change and ultimately just a replat, a new final plat for the third edition in front of the council. So there's no action specifically for this one that we're requesting, just to let you know that there's a slight change. There's no loss or gain in lots. The right of way just shifts to the south, and this first block gains a lot, and then the south block here loses a lot. So there's no net change. There's just a shift of right of way and then the utility line to the through the stub. That will stand for questions, and this is a hearing.
Thank you, Alec. Any discussion or questions for staff? Nothing? All right, I guess I will open the public hearing. Do we have anybody who would like to speak to this project? Anybody online? If you are, please raise your hand. I see 5 participants. And I think they're all here. So with that, I will close the public hearing. Well, before us, we have the motion to approve preliminary plat, subdivision, language here. Real quick. All right, so we have resolution 2026-34 in front of us, granting the approval of preliminary plat. Do we have any comments or concerns? I'd like to entertain a motion to approve. I will make a motion to approve this preliminary plat. I think that it's by right. There are no issues with the zoning. Don't see any concerns with the conditions that are attached to it.
I'll jump in and then second it, Clark.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Next item is a amendment to the zoning code, sections 125-42 related to variances, which looks fairly straightforward with regards to aligning with some state statutes.
Correct. Thank you, Chair, members of the commission. This is my single slide for this amendment request. So this is coming from staff. The 3-factor practical difficulties test is the state law sort of mandate by which all variance applications are intended to be reviewed under. The current code has some language that does not align with state law, with using some hardship language rather than practical difficulties, as well as a couple extra statutory findings, which we would like to remove. So this ordinance that's attached to your packet, 2026-09, cleans up the language and places it in line with state statute, and then it reviews the extra statutory findings that are in that hardship or practical difficulties test section of the code, which revolves around the public interest being outweighing the public interest for the variance, outweighs the code, and then there was another as well in there that we're striking completely since it does not match state statute requirements. So fundamentally, it's similar to what's in the current code, but more in line with the state law.
All right, thank you very much. Do we have any discussion or questions regarding this ordinance? Sorry, amendment to the zoning code, not ordinance. Same thing. No. I had one question. On the second page of the resolution, it says practical difficulties to include but are not limited to access to direct sunlight, solar systems. Is that just a catch-all? I mean, this is very specific items.
That's specific language in state law. So the state, and this was a few years ago when this change, and I can't remember if it happened during the original 2011 change or if it was in response to sort of the rise in solar panel usage. So basically, everyone has the right to access sunlight, and if code prevents placement if there's code requirements where it requires setbacks for like solar, ground mounted solar, if it prevents adequate access to sunlight, that's why that's in there.
So
So
justifiable.
yeah.
Reason for variance. Okay. Understand. There's no further comments or discussion. I entertain a motion to approve.
this is a public hearing, so we'll have to open and close that public hearing.
Appreciate that. I'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to comment on this ordinance? Hearing no one, I will close the public hearing. I'll entertain any motions to approve.
I guess I'll take the motion to approve it now. Sure.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. All right. Next up is an amendment to sections 125-54, -55, and -84 related to accessory structures and fences. We had a little bit of discussion on this previously, but look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and Commission. I have another short slide for you. The bulk of the changes are relatively simple. So, but the amendments have sort of expanded beyond just the accessory structures ordinance section itself. Fences that you saw previously are fundamentally the same. There were no major requests to utilize different standards that you recommended to the council. We did clean up a little bit of the language for clarity purposes to make sure it read well and was easy to understand. And then we did match, there was a triangle visibility requirement in there. We had another section of code that also references a different vision triangle requirement for corner lots. We cited that and then made sure that the language is clear on sort of how that works in the code. The accessory structures section had a little bit of changes requested by the council. The R2 section, the commission didn't request any increases in the R2 part of the code, where it's currently sitting at 528 maximum for R2 lots or urban residential lots. The council did recommend upping that to 650. There was also a request to lift the front yard restrictions for accessory structures as long as they meet the underlying front setback requirements. So previously, those were only permitted in the R1. The front yard use was only permitted in the R1 when you were 5 acres or more, or you were directly adjacent to shoreline, so that you could utilize the front yard if you couldn't fit a structure within the shoreline setbacks. This allows front yard placements or side yard placements, specifically, especially in some of these more recent developments. There's no real room in the front yard for additional outbuildings, but there could be some room in the side yard which that opens up a little bit more flexibility for placement if there are DNU easements in the R2 areas. And then in the R1, there's usually a decent amount of room in the front yards, depending on which development you're in, for a front yard placement, so they can better utilize the existing driveway access where available. So we've also clarified a few sections of ambiguous language in there. And then all of the sizes that you recommended as far as the R1 and ag lots themselves, those will all remain unchanged since last time you saw this. So staff does recommend approval of this ordinance so we can get it to the finish line.
All right, thank you. Any questions from commissioners? Nothing? All right, I feel like we've covered this pretty well, so we'll open the public hearing. Is there anybody who would like to speak on these ordinances? Adoption of? Questions related to? Yes, sir.
Is this the etiquette?
Yep. State your name and your address.
I'm Daniel Wolfert. I live at 22160 Oak Ridge Drive in the R1 category. And this references some things that were talked about previously, which I wasn't here for. I was wondering if you could go over the sizes and things like that for accessory buildings for R1 being proposed.
Yeah, so let me just go there quickly. It's basically, what we did was take about 1.5% of, so there's a table in the ordinance that says if you're up to 2 acres, you're this. If you're 2 to 4, you're that. We took the base acreage and had basically 1.5% of the base acreage is your allotment for that bracket of size. So let me just go quick to the table. Oh boy, it's a long ordinance. Okay. In the R1, if you're up to 1.99 acres, you're allowed 1,600 square feet. 2 to 3.99 shifted up to 1,800. 4 to 4.99 shifted up to 2,600. 5 to 6.99, the shift was up to 3,000 square feet. 7 to 7.99, the shift was up to 4,200. 8 to 8.99, the shift was up to 4,800. And 9 to 9.99, 5,500, and then 10 plus at 6,000. For folks who would like additional beyond that, there's a conditional use permit process that's been added to the standards that you can exceed the structure size in the given acreage bracket, provided that outbuilding square footage does not exceed 2% of the base acreage of that bracket. Anything in excess of that would require a variance. So generally, the allotments for square footage is increased. And then the number of outbuildings increased by 1. So 3 acres or less, you're now allowed 2 private garages or accessory structures. And then beyond 3 acres, you're allowed 3 private garages or accessory structures. That's the gist of the size change.
Yeah. Sounds pretty complicated. Is there anything in there that describes a path or a drive or a?
Not to add an additional drive to get to right of way.
Mhm.
So the typical is you'll have the one access, and then you can build a secondary sort of ancillary branch
Sure.
to that
Off
outbuilding.
of that
Yeah.
main
Yep.
drive.
Yep.
Okay, cool. That's all the questions I had.
Thank you, Dan.
If I can add for you too, you'll be able to find the packet online and you'd be able to see that first right within the packet here. I don't know what page, but
There's
meeting
many
tonight
pages.
is about 140.
If you have questions, send me an email. We can walk you through it.
Perfect.
Any other questions from the audience? To close the public hearing, do we have a motion? We need a
I'm-
motion to do that? We don't need a motion to do that. I'm gonna close the public hearing. Sorry. All right, staff discussion. Any other questions? You want to make a motion to approve these amendments to the ordinances?
I will move.
Second.
I have a second motion. No amendments to the ordinances, no conditions, so put it to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. That's the end of the public hearings, and we're into new business. We have a concept plan by the Oasis Group for our senior living facility at 13020 Hawkins Drive. Understand there was an open house held last week, and they were here before the Plan Commission just a month ago with the concept plan, correct?
So yeah, the Hawkins Drive, this is the first you've seen of the concept plan for this one. But this property itself has been seen before by the commission. 13020 Hawkins Drive is the site that we're looking at for a 160 unit or bed senior living facility. This is a concept plan application. So the goal tonight is to provide the developer with feedback as far as what your expectations might be for the project going forward, and provide feedback on how to make the site or development work a little better with code or our processes. This is a bit of it's a little bit more of a complex concept than we've seen previously. So this is the site. It's guided and zoned R3. These changes to the zoning districts were done in 2020 in response to the 2040 comp plan update. So this property is zoned R3, which is 5 to 11 units an acre net density. That's the range. And then permitted uses include townhomes, attached single family, as well as other residential type uses, including a senior living facility, senior center living facility use through a conditional use permit. With some correspondence with our city attorney, the density standards, though, still apply to these types of residential facilities that fall sort of a little bit beyond the traditional townhome, single family attached product uses. Here's the area of the site, the sort of the blue outlines. Those are all building footprints from near map. Development history. So in 2024, this site was under consideration by Dean Johnson Homes for a townhome development. This was it started off like 57 units and sort of got reduced to around 53 units for this particular proposal that was in 2024. It was sitting at around 7.35 dwelling units per acre. This development also had multiple variance requests at the same time. So there were the site layout isn't particularly conducive to circulation with the large wetland complex in the middle of it. So it's squeezed some of those properties, proposed units a little bit closer than what was required. It spreads out this site. If you're going around the wetland, you kind of requires to be closer to the boundary. So this particular development did shift the units as close to Hawkins Drive as possible, which created some front yard issues as well as some rear yard setbacks and separations between units. So it was a challenging site. There was quite a bit of pushback at the public hearing, as you may recall, and ultimately the developer withdrew the application before it even got, I think, to council. So that's the basis history of this. The Hawkins Trust ultimately did sell to the Oasis Group, and this is some of the very preliminary drawings we got of that townhome development as far as product type. They didn't have a known sort of product type, but they did provide examples. The Oasis Group did purchase this property about a year ago, possibly, and they're proposing a senior residential living facility, which is a conditional use permit use in the code. The density that they're proposing is sitting above the R3 maximum. So the proposal is 160 total units, 100 independent living apartments within the structure, with 40 assisted living units and 20 memory care beds. So it is a senior residential living facility, assisted living facility. The park, it's a 3-story structure that they're proposing, a little over 165,000 square feet footprint. The parking stalls are 149 proposed based off of the independent living and assisted living apartments, as well as staffing, once they get a better handle on what staffing they might need for this facility, which this might be subject to change as they get closer into future proposals. And then they're proposing a 1 acre park dedication, so dedicating land itself. So there's some drawings in that park area. Would take that with a grain of salt, but it shows sort of what could be done with that park dedicated land. The city would ultimately would have to construct the park for that property. So again, the density is higher than the 11, the max. It's at 26.2 dwelling units an acre on the Hawkins piece alone. And underground parking is proposed. And again, it's 3 stories, so there's different unit types within each floor. So between assisted living studios, 1 bedrooms, and independent living studios and 1 bedrooms, as well as common space and the memory care units as well on the ground, the first floor. This is another site rendering that was shown at the April 2nd neighborhood meeting. It shows as far as what landscaping could be provided. It's not set in stone, right? So they're exploring how they could utilize berming and screening with landscaping to protect some of the view sheds of the property. And then one of the architecture renderings shown at the meeting itself. It's a 3-story structure. It's got a pitched roof. It's not a flat roof design. And the architect or the developer is here as well to provide additional information on the design itself, should you want that. And then in your report, I've sort of walked through a couple pathways where this development could get approval, provided that there's recommendations from the commission, and then ultimately an affirmative approval from the council. So the developer has been, and so the crux of the matter is it's above the density requirement, right? So there's a couple ways that they could fix that particular code issue through what we have in our code for processes, right? So the options that we kind of talked about before this got to concept application through a pre-application meeting with the developer, they had been in coordination and contact with the Weber family to the west. They mentioned that he is a possible willing seller of the R2 portion of this land. So if you remember the zoning map, where his homestead currently sits is zoned R3, the same zoning as the subject property. The acreage just to the north of that is zoned R2. He's possibly a willing seller, depending on sort of what the outlook on this particular project is based off of some of the feedback we'll receive here through the concept. The options include acquiring additional land to fix some of the density issues. And for this particular option A, they would require some additional comp plan amendments to that R2 to get it to match the R3 district zoning of the subject property. So it still requires some policy discretion and some action to modify our guide plan and our zoning district for that particular option. Option B, so these are not in any order as far as preferability. So we're looking for discussion some of these options moving forward. So option B is a PUD only on the Hawkins property at 13020. So the council, in order to exceed density requirements, you can do that through a PUD, but the council must find that the density deviation is in the public interest. So that's pretty broad language, right? So there's discretion involved in rezoning this particular piece to PUD to allow deviations in its own site-specific code requirements, right? So you can modify height, you can modify setback requirements, you can modify density requirements through a PUD, but there's discretion. There's basically it comes down to what the council sees as a public benefit being provided by the development, and then a rezoning to PUD, a specific district specific to this development. So it doesn't change any other district standards if you're going, it just changes the specific district for this particular project to allow deviations from code. Then option C is sort of a hybrid. If there's appetite for this type of development, but there's not quite enough public benefits, there's options that the developer could explore. There's additional land acquired adjacent to build trail infrastructure or whatever it is. There could be some combination of additional land being added to the project with the PUD, which could reduce some of the density issues. So ultimately what that means is the PUD deviation is just lesser, right? So there's just a less intense deviation from the R3. Ultimately, if this type of project is within, the realm of possibility, you support the project. If you're adding an additional land, it's sort of just be sitting there unbuilt, right? So it doesn't really change the site plan itself. It just adds vacant land next to it rather than utilizing that for future redevelopment. So it's, there's options here that the developer could explore. Likely this will be a PUD request in the future with a pre-plat and whatever other land use applications might be necessary to get this reviewed through hearings and then ultimately acted on by the city council. And then the neighborhood meeting, this was on the 2nd of April. So about 6 to 10 residents showed up with some additional from the developer side. It wasn't super well attended, likely because it was spring break, right? So there wasn't a huge, there wasn't a lot of folks at the table for that development meeting. I mean, we receive applications, we have to act on them within about 60 days typically. So there's scheduling issues no matter what you do throughout the year. So ultimately what we received for feedback, it was probably going to be similar for other residents as well, similar issues cropping up. There were concerns about the height, 3 stories being too tall next to single family homes, as well as voicing that the R3 zoning district itself wasn't the right fit for that particular property. And then just general sentiment that there was positivity about the actual project, just not they just questioned the location of the particular project. So there's, some of these concerns are what sort of the last time this property was under review, right? There's concerns about the lighting, about the traffic, about 24 operations of the facility itself. But ultimately when you have this type of more intense development, sort of rather than spread out development, having the units sort of in one building, it opens up flexibility over the rest of the site for other screening and other mitigations to assist with some of the issues that neighboring residents might see. But ultimately it is a change. If this were to go forward, this would be a pretty big change as far as the size of the building itself. Ultimately, we've got additional information we need once we get on our other applications, including traffic studies and things like that. So as far as what was heard at the Hawkins, I don't know if you remember the Dean Johnson Homes. What we heard there was school capacity issues. We heard concerns about the power infrastructure. We heard concerns about traffic, about 129th traffic, the Main Street intersection itself, those kinds of things. Generally, a senior living facility is going to have relatively low traffic compared to a similarly sized apartment complex for sure. Probably very similar traffic to a 53-unit townhome development, generally speaking. The school capacity issues probably won't be a concern for senior citizens, right? Or hopefully graduated by this point. So this type of development does have some benefits compared to a standard residential district type development. But again, it's, you know, it's different than the standard we've seen in R3, like the towns of Fox Creek, Astor Mills, things like that. It's a little bit of a different type of residential use, right? So that's really all I have. Yeah, that's a lot. I'm sorry, that was a lot of information. But we also have the applicant here who can speak to some of the more specifics you have as far as why are they going this direction? Why is it designed in this way as far as 3 stories and a number of units, right? So developer can speak to some of that. This is not a public hearing at this time, right? So, you know, it's not typical to receive public input at this point in the application since it's a very high level, very preliminary as far as what is here, right? So this is where we catch the development before they've spent engineering dollars to get stormwater plans and infrastructure plans for this particular development. So this is very early on in the process. So everyone is on top of that. So
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the applicant providing the open house. Fortunately, the timing wasn't ideal, but I guess as commissioners, it's our job to take a look at this and provide our unbiased opinions about the project based on residents' feedback at the public meeting. We do have an email here as well that we can take into consideration. However, like you said, this is not a public hearing, so I don't know if we want to delve into this very deeply. Looked at the 3 different paths forward, the acquiring of additional real estate to achieve those lower densities per acre. It seems like then you just have some idle land that would just, you know, do nothing. And then, you know, the other option is the PUD, which, as you said, is probably the more preferred option. And one of the reasons why I would say it's more preferred is because I always say this, our parking code is pretty aggressive. I'd like to hear from you guys as operators, what do you really need? This seems like a lot to me, but I don't know. So that's my 2 cents. Does anybody want to comment or? Yeah, you can ask questions. You can ask them to come forward and ask them to respond to questions. We can talk internally about our own opinions about it.
Go ahead. I'm just coming, actually, I wanted to comment on out.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, I can comment.
want to comment on me specifically?
Well, yeah, you know, later we can comment
Later.
on it. On the traffic issue, which is a concern for me,
Yeah.
Personally, it's not so much 129th, it's more of Oakwood.
Mhm.
If we take, now hypothetically, there's 140 units with assisted and, was it 55 plus, I believe it is? Hypothetically, you could have 140 vehicles plus staff. And I mean, I don't remember what the other one was prior. If it's 53 units, two cars per unit, that's only 106, if I'm doing my math right. So I know we talk about it being less traffic, but it seems to me like it would be more.
Yeah, so so this would be fleshed out more in a traffic study that
Sure,
the developer
sure.
would submit to us for review. So that the typical between single family detached and single family attached is like 9 to 10 trips a house or a unit. The apartment trips are less than that per unit typically. This senior facility also, I mean, the number of drivers, I don't have a study in front of me, but the number of drivers is likely lower, especially when you're in the memory care units. Those aren't going to be drivers at all, hopefully. And then
I hope not.
the assisted living, though, and the independent care, those likely will probably have one vehicle.
Sure.
So the trips generated from the site, as far as peak hours, right, is probably going to be different. The site probably won't generate, say, commuting traffic at the same times, right? They're not going to be commuters necessarily. Some might still be working at 55 plus.
Sure.
But the bulk of those sort of trips are generated from commuters going to and from work at peak hours, 7, 8 a.m. And then 4 to 5 p.m. are those peak commuting to and from work. So likely traffic would come in morning, sort of off peak hours, or during, lunchtime or evening if they're going, out and about. So the type of trips are not the same necessarily. So hopefully once the traffic study comes in, there's actual data
Yeah.
from an engineering, like the manual, usually engineering have manuals as far as what they see as far as for different types of uses for traffic, which would give us better understanding about what it actually looks like.
Right. And when they do that I mean, because I'm thinking even further out, like what happens when we take over the Main Street?
Right.
If we lower the speed limit, I mean, now I've got a couple of examples. If you Google from the highway to Hawkins Drive, it's either the same time or faster. Go down Oakwood. So you're gonna get more traffic. And if you lower the speed limit over on Main Street, then it's going to calculate onto Oakwood. Whenever we do that, thinking outside of just not the complex here.
Right.
So
Right. So a couple factors just to keep in the back of your mind is this: we're still a developing city, right?
Sure.
So each development is coming with physical infrastructure, roads, utilities, that kind of thing. Right now so the Main Street traffic, we hear that it's bad a lot, right? So the Fletcher bypass is being constructed just east to bypass the old sort of dirt part of Fletcher and get into 81. That should improve traffic through Main Street. The other factors on the west side of this is Edgewater Parkway is planned to go as development occurs, right? It's not going to happen immediately, but as development occurs from Cali Lake Preserve down through the Weber property, Edgewater Parkway is a collector. It'll be a route that doesn't have driveway accesses to it, like Oakwood does currently.
sure.
Where that is meant to collect off of the lateral street connections and get them from north to south. That could improve some of that as well as on Oakwood. Whether it does, for sure, we don't know until it actually gets built, right? But ultimately, road infrastructure and road routes do improve as development occurs. So there's, Oakwood traffic, we hear it's a problem, right? We heard it at the last time this property was looked at as well. So we get that. This particular development does not have a direct access to Oakwood. It's only Hawkins Drive to 129th. Fire would like an alternate entrance into. Fire departments want to get to and from to get access to two different parts of the site. So there is potential here for an emergency type access, maybe from the park dedicated land area, right? But that is not a access used by anyone other than the fire department.
Sure.
So it's a closed access other than for emergency services.
I had a question about Hawkins Drive. So is that going to connect with 133rd all the way through there? Because
Nope.
we've talked about trail and
Nope.
stuff back there. Okay.
So there's potential here that the developer might request a vacation of Hawkins to keep that portion private. But this is not a utilized road other than for the outbuilding that's currently there. So there's no real need to continue to have Hawkins as a public roadway. That could open up some flexibility as far as where placement is on some of the parking lot improvements. Maybe it gives a little bit more room for the building, maybe not, since there are utilities there. So there'd still be utilities under the road. There's a sewer force main there. But what it would do is there will be turnaround requirements for this drive so fire can get in and out. If it stays public, you now are considering building a full cul-de-sac there. If it's private, then it opens up a little bit more flexibility as far as how the turnaround is designed. Since if it's a public street, you have to do X, Y, and Z for a cul-de-sac. If it's private, you just need to make sure there's turnaround for the fire apparatus. So it opens up a little bit of flexibility from that standpoint. But that ultimately would get worked out as we get further along in the process for this.
So this is essentially a sentiment check from committee, correct?
Yep,
Okay,
exactly.
so I actually I appreciate the history, looking at this that way, and I like the incorporation of park dedication land. I mean, an acre there. I hear input, and I also dislike hearing from third parties what speculation there is for property values, et cetera. But putting that type of sentiment to the side, the site itself, all that north is underground, correct? From that, there's the north T, and then on this map we're looking at now on the screen, that's all underground. And then the units themselves are really on the southern half of this lot, right?
So yeah, the park, there's interior or closed parking here, and then
Okay.
there's surface parking to the west of
Okay.
the site. So the parking is west of the Oakwood Drive part of the neighborhood. It's still visible, probably would be still visible from the north without additional screening.
So you have underground parking, you have three, and the 3-story is consistent throughout the full building then, not only the north end, but the south, all parts of it. So
So on that north facade, it would essentially view as 4-story. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be relatively accurate if without screening. Yeah.
Feel free to speak to. Yeah, absolutely. Just state your name, please.
Yeah, my name is Corey Brunton, 19 Eagle Ridge, North Mankato. I am the architect of record working on the project. The question brought up was in regards to the whether the north portion of the building was 4-story. The garage is proposed as 100% subterranean. So by definition, the project would still remain as a 3-story project.
So would there be retaining walls on either side of that driveway
Yes.
to get down to that
Exactly.
subgrade level?
Yes, sir. And that would start descending down right as soon as it leaves the parking lot there, and it would start angling down and make its way into the lower level there. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Great question.
I think one thing that wasn't mentioned that I'm recalling with prior development with a lot of townhomes was one, just public works trying to navigate pretty narrow. This site itself is complex from what I observed from, prior development proposals. So to be able to fit this kind of unit in there, I think I'm open to seeing this into a PUD or some kind of hybrid, whatever they bring, because it's a really challenging site with all the wetland there. And again, there's a lot of goodwill there for public interest. You get a brand new park. Smart city engineer once told me that it'll make sense once it's all done. So Alec, what you're saying, I'll trust your guidance there, that a lot of the development, hopefully that flow continues to ease. I don't know what we do about Oakwood, but it's just one long vein.
It is one long vein.
Yeah.
That it is. And yeah, in some days it's the Indy 500, but I think, look, I've lived there 26 years. Originally, I spoke with the city many times. This goes back 20 years. The original plan for that property, which I realized they didn't own it, but they'll do a plan, was homes like the ones that are on Oakwood with a park. Because I don't know if it was zoned R, I'm assuming it was zoned R1 at the time. I guess, these guys are fantastic. I don't talk to them. I think the building's beautiful. I just personally don't think it's in the right spot. And I'm curious as to why the city zoned that R3. I mean, I went and looked at the zoning map and there's that spot, there's a little bit of Weber and there's a few other places, but there's a lot of other properties that were not developed. As my understanding, it was probably 5 years ago. I don't know when, but it's like, why that specific area right up beside a development of single family homes? I guess that's a, and whether if you don't know the answer now, that's why I'm just curious as to going back, why we chose to select that piece of property.
Just pull up the,
And I'm asking this question because I've had 3 neighbors ask me over the weekend. So,
let me pull up.
and
the
I
map.
think somebody brought it up at the meeting we had on Monday.
Let's see if this will work. Thinking really hard.
I think you have my computer.
I don't think it'll work. I think it's just the file is too big. It'll pop up eventually here. There we go. Okay. Here's Hawkins right here.
Yep.
Right, so during the 2020 update, a few different spots where the density was increased, right? So I'm partially colorblind, so forgive the wrong colors here. So the darker shade of whatever this is here is R4. This is a mixed residential district zoning. We've got ag preserve. The Kemet Mueller property is ag preserve. And we've got R4 right here, sort of near territorial and 129. And then a shift down in density to R3 until it meets the existing R2. And then there's higher density sort of along 129, right? So there's some existing, super slow. So the theoretic, like the why it's there is higher density type development works a little bit better when it's closer to collector roadways. So when it's closer to territorial on 129th, which 129th is a collector roadway, higher density just from a land use standpoint works better when it's closer to the major roadways. That's probably why that was zoned R3. It was an open lot that hadn't been developed yet. It has some development potential, assuming you can work with and around or through wetlands. And it acts as sort of a transition zone from R2 down to R4. So you'll notice some other sort of R3 along the property, as well as some medium density type developments as you move closer to Main Street, where you get to sort of the apartment type uses, mixed use zone for commercial, right? So that's theoretically why, that's why it might have been changed to R3. As far as who was made aware, right? Public hearings the Ford comp plans get published in the paper.
Yeah.
If the properties themselves are being changed, typically there's a site specific notice to that property owner is, hey, we're considering updates to the comp plan. Here's your current zoning. Here's what we're proposing for your particular property. There's not the same type of noticing like for a pre-plat. So like the Northview Preserve that we just saw earlier, we notice things out to like 350 to 500 feet, depending on, what's around for that site-specific development proposal. The rezoning itself probably didn't have the same sort of radius requirements for noticing, which might be why it could have been a surprise last time this came around, why is it R3 and not R2. Once we get to future applications, again, the noticing will be going out to nearby residents again. But ultimately R3, I think that's why it's R3 and not R2, is that just was how they worked. One, how to get the density to be what it needs to be for Met Council purposes, and then two, because it acts sort of as a transition zone. Now, just as far as what's developable here is there's a decent amount of wetland in this area, generally speaking. So it shows a big block of the R3 color, but it's not necessarily showing on the ground, here's where the wetlands are and exactly, right? So ultimately, most properties will have wetland, which impacts how developable is as a whole. So
This project is proposing to fill a wetland and by.
correct,
Correct.
correct.
I definitely appreciate the traffic. Whatever we keep building here in Rogers is gonna continue to affect traffic. So to prohibit building in general as that is a main reason, I don't think that holds a lot of weight for me personally. 129 is a major roadway. It is gonna continue to be a roadway. I think there are other ways as a city that we can mitigate the traffic on, is it Oakwood? So like that maybe be a discussion for a different day. I do know there's a need for senior housing. I mean, people are only getting older, so like a public good. They went from townhouses, which was opposed, to senior living, which is now apparently being opposed. So I guess what would be the best use of this space would be my question. But I love the building. It's 1 story higher than the current houses nearby. I'm assuming there's a lot of 2-story homes. So a beautiful building, 1 story higher than yours, like might affect traffic, provide some public good.
I'm not saying that the traffic is the only reason. I'm saying it's just not in the right spot. I mean, the Weber properties R3, fine. It's just, if you look at it, I don't think it fits there, but it's not all the traffic. I'm just looking at it from the point of view if I lived there right behind it, which I'd live down the road and I won't see it. So, but I am looking at it from point of view of the people that are actually living by that building. And just going back in history as to what the city was telling us was going to be there, whether they had the right to do that or not,
Right. And like the 2040 plan changes that as those things change, like density changes, zoning changes, it's just my 2 cents. So I like it.
Any other comments, questions? You guys have any questions for us? Yeah, I mean, I guess I would like to know a little bit, just because we're talking about, a density code of 11 units per acre. You're proposing 26 per acre. That's 53 units. We've got a lot of parking, and I know that
Yeah.
a traffic study is gonna flesh some of these things out, but you guys have real
Yeah.
world experience, and I want to hear about that.
Oh, thank you. My name is Simeon, and we're over here on 12051 Fletcher. Yeah, these are you saw some of the pictures up there. So, we've been here. We run the Oasis Group here in Rogers. We've been here for a number of years, and we really love Rogers. And so we're like, hey, let's do something. Let's do a project. Our original look at this, we did want to do housing, and we were looking to kind of do that. I was actually looking for my son to start doing that. So I was like, oh, maybe I can start a development and build a house for him, and we'll kind of see how that works. So that's kind of how this started. And then we actually did a feasibility study. Also, thanks, Alec, for putting all this together. It's like there's a lot of information to this, but I did send the feasibility study to you. Did you
I
get
got it.
that?
Yep.
Okay. So once we did that study, we were just kind of seeing like, what does Rogers need? Like, what are we feeling like would be important to have here? And with some of the people that we talked to, and with this study, they are saying just in a 3-mile radius of this address, there's a need of almost like 630 of assisted living is needed just in that area. And if we would expand it, it would be even more. So we were like, wow, maybe we need to switch how we're thinking about this. Instead of doing just houses, maybe we need to, maybe we need to do something better for the community. And so this was really that's kind of how this whole thing even came about. We got a hold of Brunton, which they're top in their industry. They've done 70 of these across Minnesota and all over the US. So really a trusted people. We're also partnering with Cedar Creek and Cedar Crest, and they are phenomenal at what they do as well. They're really good at, kind of bringing in the community and making sure there's a lot of amenities, good amenities. And so that's kind of like the idea of what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it. So I don't know, did I miss anything, Serge?
My name is Serge, 18601 Lander Street, Elk River. So thanks him.
Yeah.
This is a beautiful, so I live behind Guardian Angel similar facility in Elk River. It's an 11 home neighborhood. And the energy, I'm comparing, Guardian Angels and our 11 home, basically neighborhood. The energy is way different. We have kids, we have parties, we have traffic, triple as 90 unit building in my backyard. So this particular building has, one owner, number one. Number two, we'll build a beautiful ecosystem. We're keeping the wetland. We're keeping, basically we'll do the sidewalk around. We'll dedicate an acre to the neighborhood. And the wildlife preservation, all will be there. Plus we can, would like to separate this property by beautiful arborvitaes that grow probably taller than the building itself. So technically you will not, it's not going to be flashing.
Encroaching.
Right.
Yeah.
In any neighbors.
Oh, berms too. We were thinking about berms. We were talking about that too, to kind of help out.
Plus we were looking to build this as a green project. So we'll be doing solar system. We'll be doing,
yeah, we have special, new thing that Brunton actually brought to us is they have solar windows now. So we're gonna be incorporating solar windows, to the project, so, and then geothermal as well. So for this project, so it'll be really a green project as well.
and I love Adam's comment. People get older. I mean, we're all,
Yeah.
one day, we'll be looking for a place, and this will be a beautiful place that, and there are two developments. I understand there are two developments right now going on in the area. So the need for this type of facility will be
Great
increasing.
need.
Yeah.
So, do you guys have any questions for us at all, or?
I appreciate you mentioning the sustainability of this project. because
Yeah.
The prior projects, there's been problems with electrical services, supply issues.
Sure.
We don't know when that's ever going to be resolved.
Yeah.
So if you could work with staff, figure out some kind of baseline metrics that we can kind of understand
Yeah.
what you're proposing, what those impacts might be, it may help us to make a more informed decision.
And what you mentioned that Brunton Group built 70 of these, 70 across the United States. So we're working with the best possible architects in the area, and they will help us to make it happen.
Just for the record, we didn't build them.
Well, design.
I don't want to overstate-
The architect, I
Overstate that, but we have certainly designed. And, with this, I spent 16 years on that side of the Diaz, and so I really, really appreciate all the work that you guys go through and what you look for and what you want to know about these developments. We really tried to look first at how this would impact the neighborhood before we designed the building. I specifically said, we are not gonna be, filling the wetland. We are not gonna be shoving this thing close to the property line. We're gonna do everything we can to push this thing as far to the west as possible, including trying to possibly vacate the easement to move it even further so we can put some berms and some trees in there and really screen that view. The building design is actually, correct me if I'm wrong, Alec, but in a residential, in an R1, you can build a house that has that same 35-foot maximum height as well, correct?
Yeah, correct. So the R2, R3, Oliver standard residential districts, the height restriction is 35 feet measured to the mean gable, right? So you're seeing that's, it has potential to have a 3-story building, right? So you can think, you drive past MI Homes down at Fox Creek, you've got the 3-story, the tuck under garage, plus the living floors, 2 above that. So those are 3-story structures around, Heinz Court there. That's a 3-story product. Is it the same exact height? Probably not, but it's a 3-story product as well. So they're whether this would have been a townhome facility with the Dean Johnson's homes, there was the potential there for, tuck under garage and 3-story product adjacent to the property line.
If the project were designed as a real modern flat roof, we've all seen facility, that can be designed to 35 feet plus a 4-foot parapet, putting it at 39 feet. Honestly, I wouldn't do that to you guys. And we studied it to look at the height differences, and it's about 3 feet. And this is so much more appropriate. The client, Oasis Group really wants this to be something that feels like it fits and feels like, you're on a retreat, if you will. So the design of the building so far, I believe is certainly accomplishing that. I just wanted that building as far away from the residences as possible, because quite frankly, the alternative, which already was looked at initially, was single family or townhomes. Those can go up to 10 feet away from the property line. We're 115 feet from the nearest
Right.
property line.
Yeah.
And when you go further north on the building, by the time it hits the center line of the road on Oakwood, where it's 500 feet away. So it's a long ways away. You look at the distance between having a building set at 10 feet away and 3 stories tall, or 150 feet away and 3 stories tall, you can't even see the building. We screen it. So we feel really good that we have, and our computers tell us all this stuff, so we can put the exact trees in. In fact, my staff were actually looking at the trees that were there in the photos, going to Google Earth, planting those trees and then looking at it. And they're like, wow, we can't even see the building from here. There's certainly opportunities to have conversations with neighbors that might have those concerns as well.
I'm going to go back to the green energy. If I come across as knowing what I'm talking about, just pretend like I don't. Is this going to require, when you're talking about solar energy, is that energy back to the grid, or does it require loud humming generators? Can you talk to that?
No generators. It depends on your local utility and whether they buy energy back. So then the meter spins back. There's no generators that are storing.
You'll have backup
Yeah,
generators.
as a critical facility, you will have backup generator.
Well,
Diesel or-
You'll need them in that area.
Yes?
So during a power outage, then the critical facility emergency generators will turn on, but when the systems are generating power, they don't turn on for that.
But testing weekly or monthly, how frequently will your generators run to prove that they're functioning?
So that depends on the standard operating procedure of the facility itself. We can actually put those gen sets inside the building too. They don't have to be sitting outside. Screened and supporting. As far as the green technology,
Yeah.
I don't want to commit to that at
I
this point
understand.
as far as what it is, but
Mhm.
it is there. Yeah.
Just a comment from me, living in the area. I'm not, and this is not a joke. This is a city issue. It's an XL energy issue. They'll be tested in the summer because the power does go off a lot.
Does it?
Yep, in that area, very often.
Really?
Oh, yeah. So you'll want a generator. That's why I was asking. It's more of a tip than anything, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, and the geese fly into the power lines and there's multiple reasons for them, but it goes up a lot.
Okay. Well, I want to answer all your guys' questions, but I just wanted you guys to hear our heart, me and Serge's heart, behind this is we, you know, want to do it right. We want to, try and figure out how we can, together on this. If you guys have suggestions, we're definitely open to that. We're, you know, whatever you
We
want.
feel like it'd be a great asset to the community.
We do. We really do.
I've got 3 notes / maybe questions.
Yeah.
First one, for the landscaping, I would recommend not doing arborvitae. That's just they die a lot. So something like fast growing spruce or juniper would be preferable to me. Otherwise, I know you're going to be looking at a lot of brown trees and still see the facility. The second one was about you mentioned 600. I think it was 630. A need for 630 people within 3.5 miles. Where did that information come from? And is that publicly
Yeah.
available?
Here, I'll just give you the report.
Be good to see that.
So, yeah, so we
And
did
concerning.
this report. They are a known, viewpoint is like all the assisted living, places use them. We were told to use them by our assisted living people that, partners that we're working with here. So, so that's why we picked them. They do all of them in all of Minnesota. So,
Gotcha.
So that was just the report they gave us. I didn't know about the report until they said they could go. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, let's do it. So,
Yeah, that's interesting. It's just shows the need. If it's not there, then it might maybe somewhere else.
Yeah.
Okay, my third question was
Yeah.
for the design. I think some of the concerns that were brought up in the public hearing were about the 24-hour facility. It got brought up compared to Target a lot. I would imagine this has less visitors during the night than a retail store would have. But what can be done to from the facility to address those concerns with the residents?
I know
wanna
one of
tackle
the,
that?
one of the items that was brought up was the amount of light.
Yeah.
Light pollution.
Right.
And you want to compare this to what was previously proposed with the streets and the street lighting, that there's no comparison. This is gonna be far darker. We can actually provide walking path, low voltage illumination, and nothing else needs to be on the building. Just got to provide safety, right? But that light spillover would not spill onto any adjacent properties at all. Any parking lot light, again, going back to starting with, but I want to live there, all the parking lots are pushed to the west side. Any parking lot lights would be full cutoff in a shoebox style that would actually keep the light aimed on the south.
And they're behind the building essentially from the house.
They're behind the building, and something that was that was brought up that was rather entertaining is the prevailing winds out of the northwest. This building's likely to block a fair amount of that from
Right.
the adjacent neighbors. And so I know there's some dust storms that occur as a result of the farmland that's currently to the west. Well, this would stop a lot of it too. And so those were some of the topics, Commissioner, that were mentioned.
Probably the neighbors will appreciate the mosquito farm that exists right now being treated.
Yeah, and the ponding that's illustrated there, we haven't, my guess is it's a detention pond, retention pond. It's really not meant to be an actual pond with, deep water. So we don't want to start conversations about safety of children and things like that. 'Cause that's really, whatever the MPCA will require is what we will actually do.
Does that answer
Yeah.
your question?
Yes, that answers. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you for
Thank you.
your comments and for
Yeah.
coming to this meeting. I think we'll move on to the next topic. Next up is a review of the Main Street master plan update.
And Mr. Chair and Commission members, I'm really just going to kick this one off and then hand it over to Cardo, who was our consultant that helped with this item. Since some of you had not been on the commission since we started this process, I wanted to give a little background on where things sat, why it kind of came up, but really dating back to around 2020, and with the 2040 comp plan, the city started to look at a few different plans for the downtown area. This included the downtown master plan, the Main Street small area plan, which was not adopted, as well as the Main Street streetscape plan. there had been some kind of changes to the overall build out to the area or anticipated build out. So that kind of triggered the need to really reevaluate the Main Street corridor as we looked at it. And then also with the turn back of Main Street likely occurring within the next year with Fletcher Bypass being under construction, it really triggered this more immediate need to really evaluate what we currently have for Rogers Main Street. So early in 2025, the city applied for a grant through Hennepin County's Hennepin Planning Grant Program and was subsequently awarded a grant to help pay for redoing the master plan. And this really was a complete overhaul compared to what was done in the past. We wanted to ensure that we were speaking with the residents regarding the overall vision for the district. And this really sets the groundwork for a lot of the work we're going to be doing with our comprehensive plan. So I'll turn it over to Patrick with Cardo, and then both staff and Patrick can answer any questions. So it's just as a PDF, so.
Okay, yeah. All right. Thank you, Brett. Can everyone hear me? Great. All right. Mr. Chair, commission members, thank you so much for your time tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity to dive in and discuss this with all of you. I'd just like to thank, Brett and Alec and all the city staff who have helped out with this along the way too. I know a lot of you have been posting on Facebook and encouraging people to attend meetings and provide their feedback. So do really appreciate that. So before we dive into, and I know you've all had a chance to read this, so I'm not going to go through every page. I promise you that. But I do want to talk about what this is and what this is not. So this is a master plan, right? Which means it is the vision. It's kind of the steady hand for the next 25 years that guides the form of streets, parks, plazas, trails, the pattern of development. It's not an exact prescription of where our curb cuts, where our parking spaces. Is this exactly the building footprint that it's going to be in 20 years? Probably not. Town planning and this work is cooking. It's not baking. So there's a little bit of room at the edges. So I'm going to start off here with the desired outcomes. And these really came from 3 different groups. They came from number one, the community. Kind of conservatively, we had about 200 people engaged in this process. It came from city staff, and then, of course, the stakeholder groups we actually met with. That's landowners, the business owners, some of the larger property owners in the area as well, Hennepin County, and some of those folks. So 4 major outcomes that came out of this. Number one, first and foremost, pedestrian safety. Crossing Main Street, walking along Main Street, it's not always the best experience, and we really want to make sure that pedestrians are safe. Protecting the most vulnerable individual, which is the pedestrian, is the most important thing. The second is supporting and growing the businesses. Your businesses are one of your biggest assets here because they, I think even when I was driving in today, every storefront was filled. A lot of main streets cannot say that. So that's an asset to build on for sure. So we want to support those businesses that are here today, most importantly, and then recruit new ones. A mixed use neighborhood. The downtown zoning district, which is kind of the basis of this study area, inherently plays by a different set of rules than the rest of Rogers. This is a pedestrian oriented environment. It's going to play by a little bit different set of rules than you're used to in other parts of town. And that is, it's a mixed use neighborhood. Housing's of different densities, different types, different scales, different heights, next to restaurants, next to offices. You don't buffer those uses. You actually mix them all together in this area. That's appropriate here. And that leads to the last point, which is something that's connected. Yes, connected outside of the neighborhood itself, but also connected internally. So that's easier to walk around this district in the future. So as part of this process, we sat down with all these groups and individuals, and we heard them out. What works, what doesn't work, where are the opportunities, what are the things we haven't thought of, and what we came out of that was with 2 different alternatives. And we drew up these 2 alternatives and we shared them back with the community at an open house, online, and smaller stakeholder groups, just to see what people liked and didn't like. So the idea is that the preferred master plan, which I'll get to in a few slides here, came out of a compilation greatest hits of these 2 slides. So a couple of the common themes. So things that folks liked. The double roundabout, the peanut roundabout, was overwhelmingly positively received by residents and the stakeholders. There was a preference for commercial uses along Main Street and a larger range of housing types. So they wanted to see multifamily buildings, but they also wanted to see attached and detached single family, kind of all spread throughout the district. A desire to kind of create punctuation marks at the north and south as entryways and gateways into the Main Street area. And then, of course, support for wider sidewalks with trees and small plazas and really creating that high quality public realm. And there was a slight preference for alternative B. And this is more of an art than a science sometimes, but I think some of that had to do with the fact that there was a grocery shown in B. And there's a little bit more density along Main Street itself. Folks also liked the kind of larger park that would be in the western redeveloped areas of the industrial areas and alternative A. So we kind of use this as feedback for the basis of what would be the 25-year vision. I won't spend a lot of time on this one because I'll break this down into detail and zoom in on kind of the 4 areas. But you can see south of the train tracks, not much change. But at the railroad crossing there at 129th Memorial and Main Street, this was number 1 folks' biggest concern. It's a very confusing intersection for motorists, for pedestrians. So improving that intersection. So we've created a pair of roundabouts, a peanut roundabout to kind of mark a southern entry there. The Civic Campus is the northern kind of marker into the Main Street area. And some of those larger redevelopment projects that are probably further out in the future on some of those larger parcels. And then, of course, the smaller scale mixed residential neighborhood to the northwest. So we'll jump into each of those sections. The first is the Main Street core itself. So again, this is centered around the new Civic Campus, proposed Civic Campus on the north part of Main Street as the new entryway and marker into downtown. You'd have the opportunity to create signage and let people know that there is a Main Street, encouraging people to slow down and drive past. And the opportunity to create a kind of outdoor community gathering room, that plaza space there, just south of the council chambers. Moving south, there's a couple of larger redevelopment sites, Wells Fargo and where the kind of car rental standalone building is now. Those are probably longer term, but just redeveloping them in a mixed use way with ground floor commercial and residential above. And so this is what the future of the Main Street core could look like. And I think it's important to note that apart from the street trees and the wider sidewalks, which do make a big difference, some of this kind of historic core isn't all that different. It's kind of a cherished small town feel that people wanted to keep. So we're standing here on the east side of Main Street, maybe 50 yards north of Church Avenue, looking south. So you can see it's mostly the same. You can kind of see the hints of the new Duffy development on the right side of the drawing, but just an improved streetscape that still kind of ties in the kind of historic fabric that's already there. The Roundabout Plaza Gateway. This was an interesting problem to try and solve. I think it's maybe easier to think about what doesn't work to back into what does work. You know, a tunnel, a bridge, too expensive. The approaches would take out probably half of Main Street, so that's not really a viable option. Moving Memorial Drive further north and 129th Avenue further south so that it's 2 very different intersections would probably take up too much land and create very awkward shaped parcels as a result. So the peanut roundabout was the preferred solution. And again, this was positively received. And it's essentially just reducing the conflict points so that when you approach the intersection, all you have to worry about is looking left. You know, is there a car coming? If there's not, you can go into the roundabout. So you don't have to look train track north, south, Main Street. You don't have to look at what's happening on Memorial Drive or vice versa on 129th Street. It just simplifies the intersection for pedestrians and motorists. And another great thing that I think this does is it does provide that kind of postcard image of Main Street from the south. It encourages traffic to slow down. You have to, right? You have to go through this pair of roundabouts. So it tells you that you're entering a different kind of environment, that this is a pedestrian environment. So you're forced to literally slow down. There's landscaping that you can put in the middle of those. At the end of Main Street, you could put a little pavilion or something, a little ode to the historic depot that was just a few feet from there. And that would kind of terminate the end of Main Street. So when you came off Industrial Boulevard, you could actually see this kind of centerpiece in this marker. And then it's an opportunity to have some of that ground floor commercial spill out of these spaces, which would signal to investors and developers that, this is a good place to invest in, but then also it just tells motorists to slow down a little bit. They're entering kind of a new area. The East Wetlands, this is a state protected wetland, so there's really not a whole lot you can do here, but folks really let us know that this was something that should be utilized more, that you could phase out over time, a trail connection from essentially where we're sitting today to the Vincent Woods Apartments, which are on the kind of southeast corner of the drawing. And then you could create a loop trail around the wetlands. Of course, you'd have to do a survey and figure out exactly where the wetlands are and what might have to have a boardwalk, what doesn't. And then longer term, you could pave it if you wanted to. But just creating this kind of natural amenity right next to Main Street. And then the redevelopment of the western sites. This is further off in the distance, probably. This is currently all industrial uses. But the idea here is that you're slowly kind of transitioning from the Main Street core to kind of smaller scale housing. And there's a whole range of housing types shown here. And again, it's not exactly about the footprint or what is here and what is there, but it is the idea of creating as many connections as possible to Industrial Boulevard. Connections are good. It disperses the traffic through a network. And they're all around a park. So those kind of recreational amenities that residents would have in the future, just like at Central Park, were really loved. So incorporating that in this area in the future. And then finally, just a visual of what this area could look like. So when I said there's a different kind of set of rules here, what I mean by that is in this image on the street, you have single family, you have multifamily, you have ground floor commercial, you have apartments above, you have a park space, probably missing something. I think there's some townhouses in that image too. All this hangs together on the same street pretty comfortably. So the idea is that this John Deere extension over time does become this pedestrian spine that links back to Main Street. So pedestrian safety, very important here. Obviously, this is something that has a cascading effect. So, right, the safer pedestrians feel, the more other pedestrians want to hang out, the more they visit businesses, the more other people visit businesses. So it really builds on itself. So safety is incredibly important. And it's not just a one kind of solution to fix this problem. Yes, you can post a lower speed limit, but that's actually proven to be almost the least effective way to change how drivers behave. You need to do all sorts of things. So goal number one is to reduce that speed. There are probably hundreds of studies on this, but a car going at about 23 miles an hour, if you're hit by that, you have about a 10% chance of being killed. If you're going just 9 miles an hour faster, it's 2.5 times more deadly. So the difference between 22, 23, 24, 25 miles an hour in the 30s is very different. They all kind of paint towards that same picture. And there's a lot of things we can do. Reducing the lane width. The street sections we've shown do meet municipal state aid funding. So they meet those services or funding requirements. Having on-street parking, it's vital to the businesses. They depend on it for their sales and revenue. But it also provides that buffer between the sidewalk and moving traffic. Street trees, they provide shade in the summer, but they also kind of narrow the field of vision for drivers, and drivers tend to drive slower when there are street trees. Marked crosswalks and rectangular rapid flashing beacons. I know one of those has been installed, but using more of those, these are just there's a whole big toolkit you can use here to kind of improve pedestrian safety. And then parking, everybody's favorite is parking. So we counted all of them. It's as awful as it looks to do. But looked at how many parking spaces there are today and how many there would be in the future. On-street parking in rear, and we looked at every single use that would be proposed in the future, the square footage, the units, how many spaces that would generate. And we found that you could still meet the parking requirements and have all the parking here. So a couple of recommendations there, short-term and long-term. So under short term, the cheapest parking space you can build is the one you already have. And you secretly already have quite a few. So number one, Memorial Drive, overnight, almost overnight, with painting and a little bit of signage, you can pick up almost 50 parking spaces. And that accounts for some of those which would be removed by the fire station. They're going to need a few probably removed so that they can pull out their trucks. Remove the no parking signs on the south side of 129th Street. There's already 8 feet from the curb to the white painted line. That's your city standard for parking. That's free parking. It's already built. It's right there. Just take the sign out of the ground. Remove the 2-hour parking along Main Street. You could replace it with other signage that discourages people from parking overnight or something like that. And then the last one is there is a little bit of a perception of parking issue in town. And I think part of that has to do with it's not always easy to tell where the parking behind the buildings is. So I think working with the owner of Our Social or some other signage could be decorative just to let know that there's parking in the rear. And then in the long term, the parking lot that you're building as part of the civic campus, just making sure there's really crystal clear signage on how to get to that from Main Street or John Deere Lane so that folks know that it's there and can utilize it. I think there are improvements that could be made to signage to let people know where the parking is. And then as you build these future streets and the future network, just make sure to add on-street parking to both sides of the street. On-street parking is half the price of off-street parking because the circulation space is already in the street. So again, use what you have. Open space recommendations. I think it's easier to show this as a map. So we have a few different kinds of flavors of open spaces. Of course, the first one, right, was those 2 north and south markers into the Main Street, the Civic Campus kind of plaza, and then the roundabout plazas. And that's for commercial uses spilling out into them. That's for more heavily trafficked pedestrian traffic spaces. That serves kind of one business function, right? That's the vitality of the businesses on Main Street. But then there's more passive open space, and that is the stormwater to the northwest, and we'll get into that in a second, the wetlands to the southeast, and then the recreational amenities. You'll notice on the south side of the railroad tracks, right there, Central Park. But the north side doesn't have that same kind of corresponding small neighborhood park feel. It doesn't have to be big, just a couple of acres, just to provide some of those open space recreations that residents love. And then the last one is connections outside the district itself. There is an opportunity to extend the bike trail or kind of wider trail along 129th Street to the roundabouts and then carrying that across to Central Park. You can bike from Central Park to, I think it's Fletcher and 124th, that little turn there. So essentially they almost meet the railroad tracks. They're very close. So it's essentially completing that network so that you can traverse east-west through this area. And improving some of the signage and crosswalks across the Industrial Boulevard, knowing that that's probably not where most of your pedestrians are coming from anyway. Stormwater recommendations. This is a multi-pronged approach as well. It's probably not simply one of these approaches. It's probably a little bit of all three. So the first one and most optimistic and probably a challenge, but worth pursuing, is one stormwater detention pond in the northwest corner that sets the stage for the rest of the development. So you build this first, and it makes the development of the rest of the area a lot easier. Again, that depends on cooperating with an existing landowner and getting an easement through to it. That might be a bit of a challenge. So if that approach doesn't work, using underground storage on some of the larger parcels as they develop northwest. And then the last one, which is easy to kind of mix in as you go, is to create some of those bioswales between the back of the curb and the sidewalk where you have 7 or 8 feet of kind of lawn. Those are great because you can kind of phase them in as you go. So they're probably not appropriate for the immediate Main Street area, right? But like Our Social, you need that concrete for pedestrians. But the rest of the street network, it would be appropriate to mix these in kind of as engineers see fit. The last thing, and then I'll promise this will be it, is the zoning recommendations. Just a few small tweaks here and there. So the idea here is to break apart the existing zoning district, the downtown zoning district, into kind of 3 sub-districts. So starting with the Main Street core, that's the area kind of in the pink red color. Essentially no real changes to zoning as it is today, but just acknowledging that this is where you're likely to have your 3 or 4 story buildings. This is where you have your apartments above, your commercial uses. And it just bookends both sides of Main Street and captures both sides of the roundabout so you can make a complete outdoor kind of entry space. So that's your primary area. And then B in the yellow color, your western neighborhoods. This is where it's going to be a little bit more residential in character. It's the supporting part of Main Street, right? It's where all the people that can walk to Main Street might live. So that plays by a little bit different set of rules than maybe the core itself. And then third, the Central Park area, we call this the southern neighborhood. Not really any changes to that long term. It's mostly residential in character, maybe some home conversions, but it's really meant to just be what it is today. So just a few small tweaks in there to kind of create these 3 sub-districts within this existing zoning district. Any questions for me?
I could put a few more details as well. Thank you, Patrick. That's great explanation of it. Obviously, touch on the parking piece, and that's going to be one of the things that probably gets brought up the most. One of the items that you'll see in the long-term strategy, and this is really pertains to any Main Street to have a very successful Main Street, is looking at not the actual core of Main Street. You want the frontages on the actual roadway itself. So if we're going to have a public lot looking for something directly off of the Main Street, so we can retain that commercial frontage, is very important for the overall walkability and everything that goes to the district. And then some of the other things that I just wanted to quickly note, biggest thing is comparison to the previous plans, and that's probably what a lot of you would be wondering, is like what was the major changes. Some of that is scaled back a little bit on the density. Everything that you saw going to the west, that's all industrial, was previously shown as high density. So as you see with the mixed use neighborhood, it kind of incorporates more housing styles. Increasing the amount of commercial square footage throughout, not just on the Main Street corridor, but obviously this area is pretty well built out. So there's very limited new commercial opportunities. So exploring how we can integrate more commercial within this direct area was very important. So obviously maximizing the intersections. Previous master plans or small area plans showed Church Ave being closed. See that as being continued to be open. Obviously there's households being served there, but also for the opportunities that could have for the future for that area too. But with that, any questions for Patrick or myself, we'd be happy to answer. Right now we're looking for any feedback and a recommendation for City Council.
Every time I see this, I see something new that I hadn't thought about before. The double roundabout and the railroad crossing. Queuing and stacking concerns about vehicles that are in the roundabout that cannot, cross arms are down. How does that function? And also, have we considered, is this a no whistle stop right now? Will it be, how do we get it so that the railroad plays ball and it makes it want to be a place you want to live?
I don't know if a railroad's ever going to play ball particularly nicely, but the latest, I looked at these stats again today just to make sure I had the most recent numbers, and I think the BNSF, and Brett, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, I think it's 4 trips a week is what they're currently at. And they said more often than not they're at night. Whether that's true or not remains to be seen, but that's at least what is it? Okay. So with that, again, that's not very often, honestly. So I'm a little bit less concerned in that regard. I think that's something that will have to be handled at the engineering level to make sure that I think there might be a little bit of massaging of having those 2 roundabouts be far enough apart so that when the arms come down, you can get a little bit of stacking in front of the arms, and exactly where the arms go needs a little bit further study, I think, to work with the railroad on that. But it's no different from today, right? Where if the arms come down and the train's passing, you can't pass through. But it really does limit the number of conflict points, right? You're only thinking about one conflict point, which is you're just worry about getting into the roundabout as opposed to working across the track and wondering what they're going to do or not do. So definitely simplifies it for drivers.
Yeah, it will incorporate new signage will have to be put into it of where to stop during, because the last thing you want is National Lampoons just going in a circle or the roundabout.
I think recurring education in general for roundabouts will be required, but. Mhm.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there's kind of two big pieces to that, to this roundabout is the railroad companies have approved similar designs elsewhere in the nation on a similar concept. It's not widely used. But this corridor has a little bit of a challenge. It's best to have a 90-degree crossing. And with our angled crossing right now, to really massage that to work with the two intersections was pretty difficult to do. So the peanut roundabout idea was brought forward from city staff in the engineering department, and we kind of evaluated that of how that would look. And it seems to be a preferred option. Obviously, we're going to have to work quite a bit with BNSF at the time of reconstruct, but it seems like this will be the option that doesn't involve an extreme road realignment the best.
Has Word of Peace made any comment on it?
Word of Peace was involved in both of we did stakeholder meetings,
Mhm.
and one of those stakeholder meeting groups was religious institutions in the area.
Mhm.
So they did have the opportunity to review. Think that they had any concerns?
No.
Sure. I think any change will be welcome there, just controlled and a peanut roundabout, you say? I mean, I think it'll keep things flowing, so.
Yeah, I think, oh, go ahead.
The other thing to note on that is currently as commuter traffic is utilizing Main Street, it's going all the way up to John Deere and then taking it right past Wells Fargo and up. This kind of new design would, for commuter traffic, push them onto Memorial more so. And then they can get on to 94. via that.
I think it certainly would. If not, I mean, it kind of precludes folks from going through and just encourages the use of Fletcher bypass.
Yep.
So, which is folklore still at this point, but we imagine it's occurring.
They're doing dirt work. They're out there.
There.
If you want to see an example of this, I think there's one approved in Conway, Arkansas, one in Canton, Ohio, and there is one built in North Ridgeville, Ohio, which is basically in Cleveland. So there's a few examples out there. Not many, but they do exist.
Are there any on Burlington Northern Railroads?
I'm not sure the railroad company that those split through, but
Speaking of traffic on Main Street, looks like the entrance off of Industrial is changing to a two-way. Was that the plan, or is that still going to be?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner, so are you saying from Industrial onto, or County Route 81 onto Main Street?
Correct. And
That's
then-
currently, it's a right in, right out. It would maintain that same consistency for it.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So if you're going north past center cuts and onto towards 81, you could still only take it right.
Forgot you could even do that because you just never do it.
Yeah,
right.
We did explore looking at if that should just become a one-way. If that were the case, it would really have to be as 4 was being redeveloped, or what's shown as 4, so the center cut area is being redone, since they have some direct access right off that road.
Similar traffic question. So we stop at Douglas Drive, but that's right before the elementary school. I'd get a little worried that if we're trying to slow down traffic, that people get to that point and then just speed up right at the elementary school. Is there any thoughts to extending this past further south?
So when the corridor is reconstructed, it will extend further to the
Okay.
south. The study area for this plan was just this kind of our downtown zoning district.
Gotcha.
So that's got a different zoning district, but the reconstruct is going to look at everything. There's some safe route to schools money that's going to improve some safety features right by the school.
Thank you. All right, I'll just go ahead. Again, I have one other question on the parking on the street. I guess is there, just kind of curious, is there a recommendation for painted parking to make it obvious? Any, like, I'm assuming it's going to be parallel to the street. Or is there like thoughts towards putting, like, extending our part of the sidewalk to just make it more obvious on where the parking is now? I think that's when you were talking, you mentioned how people kind of get confused on the parking. It does kind of just seem like it's wherever right now.
Oh, I guess I meant more so for parking in the rear of buildings. That can be a little confusing, that you might not realize that there's parking behind the building. But I think there may be opportunities to bump out at the corners, like I think at Church Avenue. And while it's not drawn in this plan, but I think at Church Avenue, for example, that might be an appropriate space for it. I'm always a little hesitant about removing a single on-street parking space. That's 20 grand in revenue. That's what the studies say. So I'm not going to cost any business owner that money. But I do think there are probably some surgical locations where I think it might be appropriate because it does help the driver a little bit realize that the sidewalk's coming out. So there may be opportunities for it.
This certainly helps to identify crosswalks too, if you get them at the intersection.
Yeah, well, it was kind of mentioned, but the rapid flashlights, kind of an interim solution that we purchased and should get installed here within the next month or two, via some long discussions with Hennepin County about it. We'll have better signage for on-street when we get to that point. Right now, if you look, it's on the light poles and it's pretty high up, so it's kind of hard to actually notice that, but for the 2-hour parking signs, but everything with the wider pedestrian corridor, we have a little more flexibility for what our signage is going to look like for that district too.
Are we working already with businesses, Our Social, to add additional permanent signage to show off parking? Local, we kind of know where that is, but
We have not to date for the private businesses. Obviously, as you've probably seen driving past, the Duffy project is well underway. With that, there's going to be a public, about 30 stalls in the back still that the city will own.
Mhm.
So at that point, we can look to do some sort of public parking sign that goes with it. And then obviously, as Patrick mentioned, looking at our civic campus and ensuring people know that those stalls can actually be utilized for district-wide parking. Since we're a daytime user, it has a lot of opportunities for nights and weekends.
yeah, I just want it to be clear that it's, some of the art and photo clips show parking, but just making it clear that this is the Rogers Main Street parking, public parking,
Mhm.
so.
Yeah, for public parking, you really want to denote it. Otherwise, it gets a lot of confusion for who owns or maintains it and everything like that. So we'll look to do that, especially as things are paved parking lots and it's more permanent structure.
As part of the county turnback of Main Street, are they going to do any upgrades like mill and overlay and restripe, do any improvements whatsoever to bring it to city standards?
So as part of the turnback agreement, they're awarding a amount of funds, which is currently under negotiation between the engineering department or the city and Hennepin County. So there'll be a portion of funds provided, which will go towards the reconstruction. It's not covering the entire thing, but it would equal about a mill and overlay. We're seeking more because it's been overlaid so many times, you can't do that again.
Yeah.
So they will have funding towards it. We have received some federal funds towards it so far, but we still have a gap. So we're working towards closing that gap. In total, the full Main Street project is about a $9 million cost.
Yeah. I think that'd be a fantastic catalyst for this development. Just you can time that the next 3 to 4 years, it would really get things going.
Yeah, and one of the other items to note and kind of the overall connection points is with the Willis Trucking redevelopment and through the funding that project has, that we have a carve out within our public financing piece to make the connection from John Deere to industrial. So that will come a little bit earlier than what was previously anticipated.
Is there enough, does the city own enough space for that peanut roundabout?
Yes, that's correct. We currently own, as you see, the 2 buildings being built. We own both of those parcels. So we own the gravel lot that's currently there, as well as the home and former
Yep.
auto shop.
So no eminent domain or anything like that.
Not needed for that, no.
That was another big positive to the Peanut Roundabout. Minimal property acquisition.
And the peanut roundabout,
Takes up parking spots, existing parking.
with the redevelopment, So obviously the city controls that, so we control when any property would be sold and.
Can we require private businesses to allow some of their parking to be public parking access or like have an easement to some of their parking or anything like that?
It's easy to do on redevelopment projects. That was how Duffy's originally, that was going to be a public easement, then became public ownership. So there does have that ability. And if you're looking at some of the kind of bigger redevelopments, if the city were to explore utilizing TIF, a parking ramp is a eligible use of TIF funds. So theoretically, you could have a parking ramp created with a set number of stalls dedicated towards the public. The city of Excelsior just did that for about 100 stalls in their downtown area.
Is any of the parking that's behind our social, is that city parking or do they actually own that parking?
The paved portion is all our social.
Okay,
What was gravel was city, now it's Duffy, and then as it's paved, it'll come back to city,
okay.
half of it, and then half will be Duffy still, but.
I think it's in there, but wondering about the peanut again, I'm just thinking watching people every time I drive past Main Street that when there are pedestrians kind of crossing the railroad tracks right now, they do cross further south than where the crossing is now. How do we ensure that we direct the pedestrians and like through that safer environment, especially with the amount of cars that should be passing through there?
Yeah, as far as actual things that prohibit them from crossing at other spots, outside of a fence, I'm not really sure what could be done. I would go maybe more the carrot and the stick there and just give them something to walk to. If you imagine, I just imagine those roundabouts. I think that's why redeveloping those as mixed use buildings that have a lot of vibrancy to them is really important, because it's going to draw on people that you want to cross there. You don't want to cross somewhere else. But I know people do. We've heard stories of people cutting in other spots. So I think it's just creating a really important focal point for them to draw them in.
And we'd also look to have an actual defined sidewalk.
Yeah.
That's crossing on both sides. And then obviously the roundabout, people have to reduce their speeds a little bit more than what they currently do. They can get going pretty good by the time they get to the railroad. So it's been force them to slow down.
Commissioner Patrick and staff. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Good. Got one more thing on the agenda. This is an amendment to the city code regarding licensing procedures and regulations regarding to cannabis businesses. Laptop battery died, so I don't have the benefit of so much information, but my understanding is it has to do with one particular applicant seeking a setback that's
Yeah.
500 feet or something to that effect.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and commission members. So this one's kind of a mix of staff driven and applicant driven. When cannabis was legalized for recreational use a couple of years ago by the state, there's some guidance from OCM, the Office of Cannabis Management, which really guided cities in the first drafts of codes. And since that point, there have been changes by OCM on their rules and regulations, as well as cities finding out what is and is not working in the model ordinances that OCM had once given. So this is a mix. So a lot of what you see outside of the buffer item is staff driven after speaking with our city attorney and some changes that they had. So some clarifications corresponding to the definitions, clarifying our license process. And you'll see a lot of this change where it says cannabis retailer when it once says retailer, because the state rules are very specific to cannabis, not as much low potency hemp products. These are the drinks, the gummies that you can find at Rogers Wines and Spirits, Cub, Target, grocery or gas stations, restaurants. So a lot of what you'll see here is kind of consistent with what is being recommended by our city attorney. This section 3 underlined, which would be new language. This clarifies our application process. So Right now, it's just on purely on a first come, first served basis. This is stating if we surpass the number of potential registrations, it would move to a lottery process to select the registrant that would be approved. The retail registration limits would maintain the same as what they currently are, which is 1 per 12,500 residents. So we currently, with our population, would allow for up to 2. The application, there's still a fee. It just got processed in a different section of this. It did include an immediate denial. So if someone applies that doesn't meet the code, we can immediately deny them. I would say the biggest one here is G4, which is on the bottom of page 3. This states that an applicant will have up to 6 months to complete their process. So the way the registration works is they need to have a preliminary compliance check prior to receiving a registration from the city. The preliminary compliance check can only occur once the space is built out. So they can technically reserve their spot in line for 6 months while they do the process of building out their space. This did become kind of an issue with a separate one that we were kind of working through, and it's kind of, we're past that point, but we did want to ensure that we had something in there that had a time limit for how long it would be in consideration. So the biggest discussion point tonight is corresponding to the buffers. And I also should have noted this at the very beginning. This is not a zoning code item, which is why it's not a public hearing. This is within our business licensing code. But knowing that this has a direct land use correlation is why we want to ensure that the Planning Commission had a chance to review it and provide input prior to going to City Council. So the proposed applicant, and taking even a step back from that, we do have one registration application that's currently under the process. They're going through the build out of their space currently, which is the former El Loro Los Mariachi space adjacent to Target. I would anticipate they'll be done with their interior build out within a few months and then seek their registration. They were outside of any of these buffers. The applicant for what we had tonight for the code amendment is about, I think it's 485 feet property line to property line from a daycare. So they're seeking an amendment to either reduce the daycare measure to about 475 or 480, or change it because it's done by property line to property line to go from the business space to either the property line or the footprint of the building to footprint of the building. So right now there is a little bit of a challenge with multi-tenant spaces where you could have quite a large property for this multi-tenant use, or we have some within more commercial areas that have really weird property lines if they're a shared parking lot that create a little bit of a challenge there. So it could be, I have draft language in there. It could be from the retailer's front door to the property lines of the buffer feature, which could potentially work. Really seeking Planning Commission's guidance on if you'd be open to either of those, neither of those. It's kind of a city discretion item at this point. And with that being said, there's also a non-applicant but separate property owner that would like the 1,000 feet from schools to be reevaluated. As the space it's on John Mills Drive is too close to the school right here on Main Street. Like I mentioned, these are both discretionary items for the city. We aren't required to make a change to it, but if it is something that the city would be open to, there was that request. The applicant did provide the applicant space is what was right by where formerly Health Source, where Express Employment just went in, Caribou Coffee, Subway, Domino's in that strip mall. So that's the space that they would be looking at. And we are with only 2 registrations. Should that change be made and they receive a registration and receive the proper licensing, that would be it right now for the community. So
That property, sorry, that property is 500 feet from,
it's about 480 because it's measured from property lines to property lines. So if you look, and it's a straight line, so it's not technically following the roadways, it's just too close.
the commercial, okay, so like you were stating, multiple tenant, but the property line itself, okay.
Yep, if it was going from building to building, it's about 700 feet. A little, maybe even a little more than that.
I have a question. Is this like a chicken and egg kind of thing? I mean, which comes first? If a daycare facility wants to build, they can't build any closer than that distance either?
No, it's
To an
not.
facility?
So the buffer only corresponds to new cannabis retailers.
Okay.
So if a cannabis retailer is already in there and a new daycare pops up, it's not going to make them use their registration or license.
Okay.
And it's only based on what's currently there. So if a space could become a daycare, it's nowhere for us to really know that since our
The
commercial
zoning
yeah.
that allows for daycare.
Yep.
You know, just
Daycare is
common
allowed
sense.
in all of our commercial districts, so. Daycare is a little bit trickier of a buffer as compared to a school. Like, school is pretty well known in bigger spaces. Well, a daycare can be on a 1 acre parcel within any commercial district.
And the bullet points are how you were trying to accommodate?
Yeah,
Or-
those were the 2 requests. I just put them both in there.
Okay.
And seeking planning commission feedback if you want either, neither.
Is there an ability just to leave discretion for application? I mean, in this case,
This is where it gets a little interesting. It's since it's within our business licensing code, there's not a variance way to go about it. Otherwise, this one probably would have sought a variance application. I don't think there's a real discretion way to do it. Because I think it needs to be pretty clear. Otherwise, we're going to get a lot of inquiries and applicants that
from doorstep to doorstep, how much was that? And then, how big is the building space? A building could be 10,000 square feet, right? But then they say, well, our main entry is here on the other side. So then they get it, but,
yeah,
so
if you're
guide
like,
us there.
it'd have to be probably public front door. Is I would have to amend the language to say that because obviously you don't want it to be like, well, our back door is here or anything like that. So we could do it that way, or we can just, if you wanted to allow for it, still just amend the language, the actual feet to allow for it too. That's probably the simplest way to do it.
So 475 versus 500
Mhm.
in this case. I can't believe that's 475. Well, again, is it also including the Culvers and the other
Doesn't
units?
include Culvers, but it includes right where Caribou is.
Okay, that's surprising that there's that much space in between, but
Yeah, and I mean, theoretically, I guess technically they could like condo out their space and have it approved that way. That feels like a much more roundabout way to do it that I wouldn't prefer, but could.
so you make the amendment, then you go back. I mean, I don't know I'm just trying to imagine risk, but 475.
I guess the
like a
biggest
lot of
question
space.
I would have for the commission is, do you have concerns with a cannabis retailer in that location or being within 500 feet to 500 feet of a property lines of a daycare?
In general, no. I have a different opinion with schools, but
I'd say it's probably not going to be a 3-year-old strolling over to the cannabis, hopefully not.
Candidly, like I'm looking at like walking, like it's a much more straight shot to the one over by Target
Mhm.
than it is to like meander your way from Caribou over to Little Explorers. So if
Yeah.
that's like the onus of like that, I don't have any concerns.
Yeah.
That's a kind of a good way to put it is when you're looking at the former El Loro space in Los Mariachis, the strip mall that's directly adjacent to that where Stony Hill is and a bunch of other businesses. With the weird property line that building has, it technically doesn't qualify because it's 400 and I think that one's 90 feet from property line to property line. So it creates some challenges there, which I don't think anyone would have foreseen when we first created the ordinance.
Can we make it a condition of the applicant to provide an exhibit depicting the lease boundary and the subject daycare facility, the distance that they have to provide some kind of drawing to show where they are and how they'll comply?
Yeah.
I think that would be a wise way to do it, and then you wouldn't have to worry about the 500 feet. Landlord should be able to give their lease area within the building.
Mhm.
That'd be my recommendation. Instead of playing games with the 500, 480, I just think that's a little bit.
So you can name the expressed leased space rather than
Correct.
actual property lines owned by another entity most of the time, by the way. So, yeah. Okay.
I just don't like making special considerations for one. applicant.
Yeah,
I
you're
just
right.
think-
You,
I just think that maybe the way it should be initially handled is.
you don't expect it, and that's why I asked about first, the variance kind of concept, but I think that's pretty prudent. So, and in this case, we all see that which unit are they going to pick and okay. Does that work?
Yeah, we are seeking a recommendation for the ordinance, and if you're doing a motion, I just with proposed changes as stated, and I can run with it from there.
All right. I make a recommendation to ordinance to maintain the 500-foot separation, but require the applicant provide a drawing to scale of the lease boundary and the distance to the nearest daycare facility or public school.
Just, I guess one question for clarification, that's for all of these values, right? For park and other cannabis business?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. I don't know what they all are, but that's exactly what my intent was.
Second.
I will second.
Motion is second. Any discussion? No. I'll vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Passes. The this past planning commission item report, I read through that. I didn't have any particular concerns. Anything you wanted to talk about, Al?
I think so.
Okay. What's your adjourn? And second,
Second.
all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
It's adjourned.
Yeah. You got it. Way to bang the-